So let's get started. Now, the first thing we want to do is download two extensions, and we're only going to use two, and this is going to be used for the third-person camera, of course. And you'll be surprised on how simple it is to make a basic third-person camera in Gdevelop. So let's start by downloading these extensions. Now, the first extension we want to download is called first-person camera, and we'll be using this a little bit later. I'll explain why soon. It doesn't really matter right now. And the next extension we want to do is mouse pointer lock. And this will be used for like our cursor moving around so we don't see it, make sure it's locked and it can't go out of the project scene and anything like that. That's going to be the purpose of this. Now, of course, a third-person camera, if you don't know what it is, a third-person camera is a common feature in 3D games where the camera is looking at the player instead of you seeing the scene from the player's eye. So basically, it's like you're an outsider looking in, hence the name third person. That's what a third-person camera is, and that's what we're going to learn how to make. So the first thing we want to do is make a player setup. We have to set up the scene so a player can actually play on this and be on this. Now, the first thing we want to do is add a new object, and this is going to be a 3D object. Everything here is going to be a 3D object, and it's going to be a 3D box, and we're going to call this ground. And that's simply what it is, ground. And with height, you can keep this the same. We'll change this later. Show the front face. Let's keep that. We can check off everything else. We only need to show the front face in this situation because in this case, it's just a plane. We don't really have to make a thick ground. And the front face image, you can choose whatever you want. You can go to Piskel. My Piskel is broken, always, like always, at the moment. But you can go to your Piskel if it's not broken. It's more likely it shouldn't be and just do a 32 by 32x cube. It doesn't really matter. Color it whatever you want. But I'm going to choose a file for my own pictures. And I'm going to go to my game sprites. I'm going to go to my thing that I use for tutorials and use this dirt. And of course, yours is not going to look like this unless you have this exact image. And we don't want to add any behaviors or variables. We're going to leave everything as it is. And let's click apply to make sure the changes are saved. Now let's drag this ground onto the scene. And as you can see, you can tell it's a 3D object. You can see that little shadow right here. So I'm going to stretch it out across the entire camera view because we need to make sure we're not falling through. You know, we won't fall through it because this is not a platform object. We're not learning how to make that today. Now, the next thing we want to do is make the player object. We're going to make the player object. And the player object is also going to be a 3D box. It's going to be 100 by 100 by 100. And we're going to, of course, call this player so there's no confusion. We want to, since this is a cube, we need to make sure we show all of the faces. If not, it's going to be missing faces because a cube has 6 faces, so we need to show all of them. So show back face, show all of these faces, yes. Okay, and I'm going to use a red little sprite right here. Of course, you can go to Piskel, go make a 32 by 32x cube. This is exactly what this is, and save it. So I'm going to click OK. And right here, every time I'm just going to fill in red cube, red cube, red cube. It should show up like this. If it doesn't show up in the drop-down menu, you can just keep manually choosing a file for all 6 of them. Now let's hit apply and let's drag this onto the scene. And as you can see, you can already tell, well, you can't really tell here, but it's a 3D object. And a sign that this is a 3D object is that this cube right here does not exactly align with the red box itself. Now let's preview the scene and see if we can see anything. And we're looking from a top-down view right now because we don't have a camera. So in this case, everything looks like it's 2D. Everything looks like it's 2D in this case, but just know that this is not actually 2D. This is very well, in fact, 3D movement. Now, let's start also by making the player movement because we need to make the player to be able to move so we can actually tell that the camera's working. So let's add a new event, and I'm going to right-click this blank event and put move events into a group. This is a good way to organize your projects to make sure they don't get really junky and that you're not confused on what code does what. I'm going to delete all of this, and we're going to call this player movement. I'm going to type in player movement. And the player movement is just going to be like some basic top-down movement where you use ASDW to turn and you use W to move forward and everything. It's going to be that type of movement. Nothing sophisticated, nothing complicated. So let's go to the drop-down menu and add our first condition. Now our first condition is going to be using the W key. So we want to go to other conditions and we're going to go down until we see keyboard and we're going to put key press. In this case, we want the W key press, so we put W key press. And basically what the code is saying right here in this condition, what the code is saying is if W key is pressed, do whatever we do in this action. So now we have to add the action. Now we want to add a force to player. So I'm going to click into player, scroll down until we find where it says add a force at an angle. So I think I missed it right here. I'm going to add a force somewhere. I think I keep missing it. Yeah, add a force at an angle right here. And the angle we want is player.angle. And the reason why we put player.angle is because this means we will move forward according to what angle the player is facing. That means we're not just going to move forward in a linear direction, if that's the right way to say it. Like, we're not going to move forward in a set direction. It's always going to be based on which direction the player is facing. That way we don't have to code all this complicated logic. We can just do this. And I'm going to put it at the speed of 400 pixels. It's not too fast. And you want to put instant force, because if you put permanent force, it'll keep moving forward and you're not even pressing anything. And then you'll have to use a stop the object event, and that's unnecessary. There's no point of doing that. Just put instant force in this case. And that's how you move forward. So I'm going to hit preview and let's see if this works. So if I press W, you see it moves forward like that. Of course, that's because that's where our player is facing at the moment. It's facing in that direction. And let's add another one for A and D. We're not going to use S in this case. Normally you'll use S, but we're not going to use S today. Let's add a new event below and put add condition, other conditions, keyboard, and in this case let's put if A key is pressed. Now if the A key is pressed, let's click A and click OK. We want to change the angle of the player. So I'm going to click into player, and here's the thing. You might be able to think that you can use this rotation on y-axis and this rotation on x and all of that, but you can't use that because it's not turning it in the right direction. They don't have rotation on z-axis yet, which is what we would normally need in this circumstance because it's a 3D object. So in this case, we have to use the 2D commands, which is the angle commands. So we're going to change the angle. We're going to scroll down and put angle right here, and we're going to change the angle. Since we want it to turn to the left when we press A, we want to subtract. So we're going to subtract by, not subtract, I'll say add by, well, you can subtract by 2. Adding by -2 and subtracting by 2 is the same thing. So I'm going to put subtract by 2, and let's preview this and see if this works. We always got to test our code. If I press A, you'll see it turns. If I press W, it goes in the direction of which I'm facing. So already with this code, I can technically already move around. Of course, we want to do the same thing, but with D. So I'm going to copy and paste the A code, copy it. I'm going to paste it. Instead of putting if A key is pressed, I'm going to put if D key is pressed. And now instead of subtracting 2, we're going to add 2. Or technically we could put subtract -2, but that's just making things overcomplicated for no reason. So I'm going to hit preview. And I'm going to, if I press D, it turns to the right. And if I press A, it turns to the left. And you can tell easily that this is turning in this direction. And that's just some basic player movement. Now, you might be wondering, okay, what about the third person camera? Okay, we're about to get to that section right now. So, I'm going to start by adding a new condition. And this is how you make the most basic form. The tutorial is not going to end right now, of course. You can tell there's more time with the tutorial. But this is the most basic third-person camera you can possibly make. But I'm going to show you why this is not good in a second, and we're going to change that up a little bit. So we're going to have no condition because we want this to always happen. And I'm going to put add action. And let's go into other actions. I'm going to scroll down in other actions until I find the camera. It should be in 3D. And then put look at an object. Now, this is a Gdevelop native command because, of course, every scene naturally has a camera. We have a 3D camera when you have a 3D scene, but the 3D camera is always on the scene. But when we use this command, you're gonna see what it does. Now, the object we want to look at is player. And of course, we're on base layer. Whatever layer your player is on, that's what one you want to use. Camera number, it can be 0 by default. It doesn't matter. You can leave it blank. Stand on Y instead of Z. Don't use this. It'll stand on a different axis and make the view look different. Just don't use it in this circumstance. I haven't found a circumstance where it's actually useful yet. But of course, there probably is some circumstance where it is useful. But in this case, it's not. So let's preview. Now, when I preview, you see it's already things are already looking off. First thing is I have forgot to do one thing. Our players, our ground, the Z elevation, the Z position in Gdevelop controls the height. So the player needs to be above our ground. Our ground Z elevation is 0, and our player Z elevation right now is 0. So we're going to change this to 50, and this means it'll be higher now. That's why the object didn't look 3D. That's my mistake. And as you can see, I'm looking from a top-down view, already kind of awkward. Already kind of awkward. But if I move around, I mean, you can see that everything is kind of working right now. And it looks okay, but I can tell that most people wouldn't want this in their game. In the least, this doesn't really look that good. This doesn't look that good because there's no way we can change our camera's angles and stuff. Is a very easy way to make a third person camera, but it's not flexible. But you can use this if you're trying to make a really simple game. Now I'm gonna click D on this, and this disables the code. That's the simplest possible way you can make it, but this is not a very flexible way in the least. Now, how do we make a more flexible 3D camera? Keep in mind, this 3D camera that I'm about to make, third person camera, is still quite basic. If you get this video to 50 likes, I'll make a more advanced one that is kind of used in other games. But this one is still quite basic, but it's definitely way more flexible than the one I just showed you. So now, let's get into the extensions. If I click Project Manager, you'll see that we have two extensions. We have mouse pointer lock and first person camera. And you might be thinking, why do we have a first person camera extension if we're trying to make third person? And the reason being is the way we're going to do this, since the 3D native camera that Gdevelop has is not very flexible, it's hard to change values of it, like to make it actually work right. We're going to use an object, and we're going to be looking out of the object's eyes, but it's not going to be the player's eyes. We're going to be looking at an object eyes that's not near the player. So basically, we're still going to be using a first-person camera, but it's not going to be from our player, if you know what I mean. Now, let me show you what I mean. So the first thing I'm going to do is add a new object, and this object is also going to be a 3D object. It really doesn't have to be, but might as well make it a 3D object. Well, actually, it kind of does need to be this because we have to change the Z elevation of it. So this object name is going to be called camera because that's exactly what it is. This is the camera that we're going to be using. You can keep the width and height the same, keep all that the same. And let's see. Let's set. We want to show all the faces because once again, this is a cube. Really, you don't have to show all the faces. I just kind of like showing all the faces anyway. And I'm going to use a blue cube. So like I said, you can once again go to Pixel, make a 32 by 32 cube. So I'm going to choose File, put blue cube, and now it should pop up in my drop-up menu, and I'll just put blue cube for all of the faces. So now we're done with that. And we don't need any behaviors or variables. Now the first thing we want to do, I'm going to show you something. So I'm going to put the player near the center of the scene. I'm going to put the camera right here. And let's see this right here. Now, the first thing we want to do, I want to show you how it's going to look, how we want it to look. So I'm going to go into the events, add a new event below, and we're not going to add a condition here. Now the first thing we want to do is always hide the camera. The reason being is because if we don't hide the camera, you'll find that sometimes the camera will be able to see itself and it'll basically look really bad because you'll be looking at your own self in this case, which is a blue cube. And of course we don't want to see that. The camera shouldn't be able to see itself. Okay, so we're gonna put hide. I'm going to put hide visibility, and now everything is hidden. The camera will always be hidden unless we say otherwise. And another thing we want to do here is add an action and put camera and put actually not camera, go to other actions and go to first person 3D camera and look through object eyes. Of course, we don't want to look through the player's eyes. That would just make it a first person game. We want to look through the camera's eyes, not the player. And of course, if we're on base layer, we use base layer. And now I want to show you what I mean when I do this. Now right now, okay, I forgot to make the elevation go a little bit higher. I'm gonna set the camera's the elevation to like 300 or something. It might be too high. I'm just gonna keep testing out values. Now this is kind of what I mean by this. Of course, I can't rotate it right now. I didn't set up the settings to be that way. but you can't rotate it right now. That's all you need to know right now. So the thing is, we're looking from the outside, as you can see. We're no longer looking at the player. Of course, in this case, we want to be able to actually, see the player. And I kind of have the player halfway in here. Let me put it at 100 Z order. Okay, let's preview this. But as you can see, we want the third person camera, of course, to follow the player. But of course, you can tell we're looking from the outside. Okay, now the next thing we need to do is actually add some controls. We need to add some controls so we can actually move around. Because even though you have a third person camera, we no longer have this auto target thing. So we have to actually be able to move our camera in order to be able to use it right. Okay, so let's get started with that part. So the first thing we want to do to be able to change our camera is we're going to take advantage of that mouse pointer lock extension. And basically what that does is make sure the cursor can never move out of the scene unless we press escape, because that is a very annoying thing when it comes to first person games. If you ever play one that is not correctly programmed, you'll find that your mouse cursor is going out of the screen and you have to keep putting it back in. It's really annoying. So let's use that extension. Now the first thing we want to do is put add condition, and we're going to go into other conditions. Scroll down till you put mouse and touch, and put if mouse button is released. And the mouse button we want to put released is left, which is that's basically what's used for most games in terms of actions. And if the left mouse button was released, and you don't actually have to put and in this case because just simple logic. If you're using a lot of complex logic, you should use and. But and if the mouse pointer is not locked. Basically, we're saying if the left mouse button is released, basically means if we kind of almost the same if we press it, not exactly, but if we release the mouse button and the cursor is not already locked, then we want to lock the cursor. So how do we lock the cursor? I'm going to put action, other actions and conditions, go to mouse pointer lock and put request pointer lock. Now, request pointer lock, all it does is it says it right here. It locks the mouse and then it hides the pointer. That's what it does. Now, the next thing I want to do is add a new condition below. We'll add a new event below. And now we're going to try to check if the mouse pointer is locked. That means now we're locked in. Now we're ready to actually move the camera. So I'm going to scroll down until I see mouse pointer lock. If the mouse pointer is locked, now we want to actually make the camera movement controls. So we want to change the angle of the camera because remember, we're looking through the camera's eyes. So we want to change the angle of camera, not player. So I'm going to click into camera, scroll down until I find angle, and we want to make it like we want to add a value because we put it set to, if we set it to an angle, you'll see it kind of keeps trying to jitter, it keeps trying to snap back because it's setting itself equal to a value. It's not actually adding to that angle. It's setting itself equal to a set value. Now, what we're going to use, you would think normally, okay, we want to add, the position of the mouse and stuff, the movement, but it's harder to calculate the movement of your regular mouse. That's where the mouse pointer lock extension comes in. You can easily detect movement of the mouse using this extension. Now we're going to put mouse pointer lock, and if I go down, you can already see these options. And I'm going to press tab. Make sure that mouse pointer lock movement X is highlighted, and then you press tab and it'll auto complete it. And now we're going to put mouse movement pointer lock X. We want to add the angle by this. So I'm also going to put divided by 20. And the reason why I'm putting divided by 20 is because your mouse moves faster than you think. So if you don't divide it by a number to make that amount smaller, it'll move extremely, extremely fast. So basically this right here, this divided by symbol, this divided by, not the symbol, whatever number you divide it by, that basically sets the not determinant, this determines the sensitivity of your mouse. That's what I was trying to say. So if you ever want to change sensitivity in the game, that's what determines whether or not the sensitivity is going to be slow, is going to be fast. Now that's how you do the X movement. Now how about the Y movement? We want to be able to look up too. So in order for us to be able to look up, let's add something else. So I'm going to change the angle, not just the regular angle of the camera, because if we change the angle, that only accounts for the X angle, aka kind of the Z angle for the 3D object. Now we want to change the rotation on the Y axis because of course we're trying to look up and down. So we're going to put add, and we're going to put mouse pointer lock. And instead of movement X, we want to do movement Y. That detects the Y movement of the mouse. Once again, divide it by 20. Make sure to keep this consistent, because if not, you'll move much faster or much slower on the Y-axis while you're moving at a different speed on the X-axis and vice versa. Keep those consistent. Now let's preview this. As you can see, I can now look around with my camera, and the game's lagging a little bit. That's how I'm recording. Normally it would not be really doing this, but I'm trying to record this, so using a little bit more CPU. Now, I can move around, and everything seems fine right now. Of course, there's a problem. We don't follow our player yet, but we're going to fix that soon. Now, there's a problem. If I keep looking up, you'll see that I can flip my camera upside down. And as you can see, flipping your camera upside down is not really a feature that's used in games because it simply doesn't look right, and it makes the game not play right. So we have to set limits on our Y rotation. So how do we set a limit on our camera's Y rotation? We do this by using a feature that this is not only a feature in game development. This is basically kind of something that's used. Well, it mainly is used in game development. It's kind of a mathematical tool. So I wouldn't say mathematical tool. I don't want to misexplain this, but it's mainly used in game development. And what this thing is called clamping. And clamping a number or a value, it sets a limit on the value. So basically, it can move however it wants, but it's set in between a minimum and maximum limit. It cannot go over or under those limits that you set. So that's what clamping is. So let's actually start using some clamping. Now, clamping is something that we want to always happen. This should always be in effect. Therefore, we're going to put it in the same condition as this add condition right here, because blank would signify that this will always be being checked. Now, I'm going to add an action. I'm going to put camera, and I'm going to put change the rotation on y-axis. This is what you always want to do. Whatever value you're trying to clamp, you want to set it using an event first. You want to put equal sign because we're trying to set it to. Now, the first thing we want to do is put clamp. Don't use all caps. Use clamp. And this is a mathematical tool, and you got to put the parentheses. And as you can see, if you let it explain it right here, let me show it so you can see it. Clamp, it restricts a value to a given range, like I just said. And as you can see, the first parameter is the value of that we're trying to clamp. The second parameter is the minimum value, and the third parameter is the maximum value. So that's what we're going to be doing. So I'm just showing you this so you're not confused. Now, of course, the value that we want to clamp and limit is camera dot rotation y. That's the value that we want to limit. And then since you're trying to go into the next parameter, you want to put a comma and then put space. You don't have the space, but it's just common coding practice to put spaces because it makes your code look cleaner and more readable. Now the second number that we want to put is the minimum value. In this case, we don't want the camera to be able to go under the rotation of -90, because that's basically, if you're thinking about the degrees, you can kind of already see in your head of, okay, that won't let us go past a certain amount in like the upwards. It'll all make sense. But you can change this minimum value if you want to change something different. Let's put another comma and press space. I'm going to put 90. So now our minimum value is -90, maximum is 90, and the value that we're trying to limit, of course, is camera dot rotation y. Now we click OK. And now if I hit preview, you'll see something totally different happens. When I try to look all the way down, I can't move any further. This is my limit. I'm trying to move further. I'm trying to, even if I try to just dash through the value, I'm trying to move my mouse as fast as I can. It's not working. It's just not working. So, same thing. You can't tell because everything looks wide up here, but best believe there is a limit. I'm still moving my mouse up, and of course I can't see the floor because it's not flipping. So basically that's what clamping does. We use this to limit the camera. Now what do? We're trying to make the camera follow the player. So how do we make the camera actually follow the player? Like, how do we actually make it always set on the player? So let's start by setting some things that are always going to happen. Now, let me explain how we're going to do this. Now, basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to be setting up our camera in a way where the position of the camera is always equal to a value that's relative to the player. And we're going to do this for the X, Y, and Z, but we're going to change the X and Z later because you'll see how this becomes a problem when we try to add new features. But the Y will always be following it. So let's first of all start by adding a new event and put it in the Always tab. You want to put it in the Always tab because if you don't put it in the Always tab, there's no need to keep creating different Always tabs. Put everything that you want always be checked in this blank condition tab. So I'm going to add an action and I'm going to put camera. I'm going to put the Y position of the camera. So I'm going to type in here Y position and set it equal to player.y. In this case, we don't have to we don't have to add or subtract any values to change it. We just want it to be set equal to it all the time. Now, when I move around, you'll already see there's a little bit of a change here. Now, when I move to the side, my camera is now following that. So that's already good. Now look right here. Now we have a natural spacing. We're going to keep the spacing like this for now. And I'm going to actually open up a calculator and let's do some math here. We're going to open up a calculator. Now, the X position right here is 629, not 29, 28 for the player. And for the camera, the X position is 152. So we want to set the camera equal to the player's X position minus a certain value. And the certain value is going to be the difference between these two objects' X positions. So of course this X position is 220, not 200, 628. So we're going to put 628 minus, and then we're going to scroll down to this camera and we're going to put minus 152. And this is what the value we want to be minus. We want to be the player's X position minus 476 because that's the difference between the X positions. Simple math. And another thing I'm going to do just in the meantime, I'm going to lock the position and angle of this ground and prevent its selection in the editor so we don't keep clicking on it. And I'm going to put this right here. Now I'm going to add an action, go to player, we'll go to camera, go to X position. I'm going to change the X position equal to player dot X minus 476. And you're going to see another change. Now I'm kind of really following it. Now I'm kind of following it even better. And of course I can zoom it out. I can like move my camera around so I can see things better. But now we're kind of following it right here. And we could do I'm not going to actually do the same thing for the Z position yet. But the reason being is because we're not jumping in this tutorial. But yeah, that's it right there. Now, one more thing before we go. Technically, we could leave right now and call it a day. We're technically kind of done with it. But I wanted to show you a common feature. A common feature in 3D games is to be able to, zoom in your camera, zoom in and zoom out. We're not going to use the scroll wheel for this. I could program it, but it's easier for me to actually explain to you what's happening when I'm not using a scroll wheel. I mean, I could still do it, but like I'm just not going to use a scroll wheel for this tutorial. Just know that what I'm about to show you with the zoom in, you can easily replace it yourself and put scroll wheel up or scroll wheel down. So let's add a new event, and we're going to add a zoom in and zoom out feature, but you're going to find out we're going to have to change a few things and add a few things. Now, I'm going to go to this blank condition and right click it and move events into a group. I'm going to name this group zoom in slash zoom out, zoom in slash zoom out. Now that we have zoom in slash zoom out the group, we're going to set some commands. Now, space key I'm going to use for this tutorial, of course, you could use scroll wheel if you want, but I'm going to put if space key is pressed, so you're going to zoom in. So how are we going to do this? So, let's put this right here. Let's go to other conditions, keyboard, and let's go into key pressed. And in this case, we're going to put space key. If space key is pressed, and we don't want to put trigger once, we want this to keep happening. We want to change the Z position and the X position because that's what's going to actually control us zooming in towards the object. Towards actually really in this case the center of the screen, but we're always following the object, so it doesn't matter. So we're going to click into camera, we're going to change the Z. We're going to add 3 for the zoom in. And for the zoom out, we're going to go into the X position of camera. I'm going to put X. And we're going to not add 3, we're going to subtract 3 in this case. We're going to subtract 3. And now, if I do this, if I click into the scene and I press space, actually in this case it's kind of zooming out. In this case, it's zooming out. So I might program that a little bit wrong, So we want to subtract 3. Let's subtract 3. And let's add a 3 down here. And let's see what happens. So zooming in on one aspect is going down on the other aspect. The reason being is because our X position is still locked. That's why I'm telling you, if we want to add zoom in and zoom out features, this X position being locked all the time, it becomes a problem because we have to move our X position if we want to zoom in and zoom out. So that's why that's a major issue. Now, how do we fix that? The first thing we want to do, of course, is, delete this thing. We want to delete this locking the X position. We're deleting that. And another thing we want to do is we want to start clamping more values. We have to set new limits on our camera X position and our camera Z position because of this. The reason being is because we're trying to zoom in and zoom out, but we don't want to be able to zoom in and zoom out infinitely, or else we're just going to be able to go past player limits. I mean, basically we don't want to be able to zoom in and zoom out infinitely, so we have to limit, aka clamp, these values. So how are we going to clamp these? Of course, we're going to put these in the always section, which is this blank condition. And I'm going to put add an action right here. And we're going to click into camera. I'm going to go into the Z position, change the Z position of the camera. And the Z position of camera, of course, we want it to be equal to, and let's put clamp. The value we want to clamp, of course, is camera.z, which also stands for the Z position of the camera. Put a comma, press space to signify a new parameter. And now I have these set values. Of course, I've already did the projects I make tutorials on, so I already know what to do when I'm doing these tutorials. But these limits were based on a good spacing from the camera. If you want to set your own limits, pay attention to what I'm about to say, because these limits I'm setting, you can easily change them so you can customize it on your own. Now, the player limit, let's say the minimum value I have for player Z is not player Z, for camera.z is based on the player Z position. So look at this. It's based on the player Z position plus 250. So that's the minimum. I can't go less than this value. So basically my camera has to be at a certain height. It has to be at a certain height. If you want to set this to be something lower, of course you can make it plus a lower value than that if you want your Z position minimum to be lower. And then I'm going to put comma. And our maximum value, I'm going to put player.z plus 700. And that's the highest it can go. Basically, that's the highest our Z position can go in terms of of course, our height. So that basically, now we've successfully clamped the height. So now let's clamp the sides of it, which is the X position. So I'm going to put add an action, go to camera, click X position, and I'm going to put, let's set it equal to, of course, we're going to start with clamp because we're trying to limit the value. The value that we're trying to limit is camera.x. Let's put camera.x. And the limit that I set here, let's put a comma, player.x. We're going to put player.x minus 723. Player.x minus, that's the minimum value, of course, we can set our camera's thing to be equal to. But keep in mind, when we're zooming in, our X position is going up, and when we're zooming out, our X position is going down. So that's basically that's setting the maximum amount we can zoom out. That's kind of what it's doing. So now let's put comma, and the maximum value I want to be is player.x. .x. And you might think we're going to put plus a value, but I'm actually going to put minus 423. That's, remember, these are just values I set based on my own likings. You can change these. The reason why I put player.x minus 423 is because if we put plus, that means the camera would be able to zoom in all the way in front of our player. You don't want the camera to be able to zoom in front of your player, so that's why I set this value as the maximum still. So now let's click OK, and let's finish our zoom in and zoom out code. I'm going to copy the space key is pressed and paste it. And I'm going to put, instead of the space key is pressed, I'm going to put if M key is pressed. And remember, M key in this case is zooming out. So I'm going to put, instead of subtracting 3, we're going to add 3 to the Z position. And instead of um, adding 3 to the X position, let's subtract 3 to the X position. Now let's preview this once and for all. Now if I press space, it should zoom in if I press space. Let's see this. It's zooming in. And as you see, there's a limit. It reached its limit. It can't zoom in any longer because it's reached its limit. If I press M, it zooms out. And I hold it, it's reached its limit. It reached its limit. That's what it does. It reached its limit. That's the farthest we can zoom in, and this is the farthest we can zoom out. Now, as a thing you can do, you can make it so if you can make it so they sync in a way where they both max out at the same time. Because you see, when I was zooming in, the X position or the Z position, I can't really tell exactly which one, but they would kind of clamp at different times, which may be unlikable. By like, it's just not good look on the eye. But basically, all you have to do is change the values up so they clamp at around the same time. But that is how you make a simple third person camera that's yet is very flexible. You can add more things with your own knowledge of Gdevelop as well to this camera. Of course, I also showed you how to make that third person, this really, really simple one. I don't recommend that one unless you're making a very simple game, you just don't really care that much. But I want to thank you all for watching. But if you get this video to 50 likes, I'll make a more advanced 3D camera. The ones that are used in the games, like, I'll say, for example, maybe a kind of a Legend of Zelda like camera, a more advanced camera where when you're actually using your mouse, it looks around the player and things of that matter, because that's the most advanced kind of 3D camera. But if this video hits 50 likes, I will make that advanced third person camera in Gdevelop, a real tutorial that will be coming straight to you. So I want to thank you all once again for watching. If you enjoy content like this, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on any of my videos. Once again, last time saying it, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next tutorial. See ya.